Hi guys, welcome back to Sacred Vedic Astrology. My name is Samantha and I am a professional Vedic sidereal astrologer. So if you are new to my channel, we are only doing Vedic sidereal astrology, which means true to the stars, true to the actual placements of where the stars are currently at in the sky in connection to the ecliptic and the shifting of astronomy over time, essentially. And Vedic astrology is the ancient form of astrology that does come from India, and it is the more predictive, accurate, and pinpointed system of astrology from someone who has studied both systems for essentially my whole life. I got into Western astrology when I was about 12 years old, and it started this kind of lifelong obsession with astrology, and upon a series of strange events, which maybe I'll do a video on another time, I basically got forced into becoming a Vedic astrologer. So that's a video for another time. But as someone who has worked within both systems, I can confidently say that Vedic astrology is really the system of astrology that you want to use if you want to be accurate and predictive and very, very pinpointed when it comes to astrology. All right, so we are going to go into a understanding today of Rahu versus Ketu in the Vedic astrological chart. Rahu and Ketu is essentially the ecliptics of the moon, right? So in Western astrology, they see Rahu as the north node, Ketu as the south node. However, as always in Vedic astrology, we have a much different and more in-depth understanding of Rahu and Ketu, or the nodes of the moon. So to understand Rahu and Ketu in the chart, to understand Rahu and Ketu in transit, to understand Rahu and Ketu in conjunction with personal planets, to understand Rahu and Ketu in synastry, we have to understand the stark differences between Rahu energy and Ketu energy. So, Rahu is the materialistic worlds in Vedic astrology. So, Rahu is that materialistic desire that we have to be successful, to achieve things, to be of the world, right? Rahu is very of the world. Ketu, on the other hand, is not this world, it's really that other world. It's Moshka energy, and Moshka means spiritual liberation. Right? So if we see Rahu with personal planets, or Rahu very strong in someone's chart, let's say Rahu is in Virgo on the ascendant, someone can come across very larger than life, very present, very focused on material desires, the material world. They're going to like nice things. They're going to like expensive things. They're going to want nice cars. They're going to want nice homes. Things like that will come with the energy of Rahu. If someone is very Ketu dominant, they can be the richest person in the room, and they're probably going to be very subdued. They aren't going to be the flashiest person in the room, right? There's been so many examples in history of very successful, famous celebrities who have Ketu on their ascendant, but you would never know that they were successful and rich by just looking at them, because they tend to withdraw, they tend to hide, they tend to be more, which is less of that material world and more of that spiritual world and more of that liberation and more of that energy of letting go. Okay, so Rahu can feel like something that we feel obsessive towards. Rahu can be an energy we feel, like our soul is going towards to learn some sort of huge lesson. You'll find that Rahu is also an energy that gets better with time and gets better with development, while Ketu is an energy in the chart that is very innately familiar and very innately comfortable. But we can find that when we go too much towards our Ketu energy, our soul doesn't always feel the most fulfilled. Right? Because Ketu is something that is sort of like a been there, done that energy. And we can have innate gifts, we can have innate abilities with Ketu. But when we go towards Rahu, that's usually when our soul is the most fulfilled or lit up or is learning and growing the most when we go towards the energy of Rahu. So I like to see Rahu and Ketu as like Rahu is something that can really develop with time. It's harder to develop it, but it will bring us a lot of, positivity if we go towards it and develop that energy. While Ketu can sometimes feel like this constant void that we're trying to fill up and fill up and fill up, and we never actually get that true soul fulfillment with Ketu. All right, so let me give you guys an example. If someone has Ketu in the 10th house, they can try so hard to get that career fulfillment, but they will more often than not actually find career fulfillment when they let go of some sort of idea of how they expect their career to be, and when they bring in more of that Ketu energy into their career, where Ketu is spirituality, spiritual liberation, Ketu is film, Ketu is photography, Ketu is oil, gas, magic, all these very interesting Ketu themes. So, for example, if someone has Ketu in the 10th house and it's, poorly aspected, if they're trying to be, the next big CEO of a company, it's not that it's not possible, but they're more likely than not going to find a lot more career fulfillment if they go towards like a spiritual job, a consciousness raising job, a strange job, a job in film or photography or television, going more towards that Ketu energy as opposed to that Rahu energy. Someone has Rahu in the 10th house, they're actually going to do very well when they go towards a big career. I've seen so many people who have Rahu in the 10th house that I know in my personal life. Some of my closest friends have Rahu in the 10th house, and they always have these like really amazing, huge careers, and they're very well known and they're very well respected in their careers with Rahu in the 10th house, because Rahu is what actually brings fulfillment, right? So if you have Rahu in the 10th house, you're actually meant to go towards that career development and having a big career, having a larger than life career. Okay. Rahu is also foreign lands. So you can find when people have Rahu in the 10th house or Rahu in the 7th house, they work with foreigners or they marry a foreigner with Rahu in the 7th house, or marry someone very different from their own cultural background as well too. Rahu is also foreign lands as well. Okay. On the opposite end of that, if Ketu's in the 10th house, they're going to feel more fulfilled when they go towards developing a healthy home and a family and accepting that maybe their career isn't going to be this huge career in this lifetime, but it can be something that is more Ketu-like. So being an astrologer, right? I have Ketu in the 10th house. The only career that's ever fulfilled me is being an astrologer. And it's actually the only thing I'm really meant to do in this lifetime, which is a story for a different time. But that's that Ketu energy, right? Someone has Rahu in the 7th house, they can really feel their best and develop and grow a lot in relationships and business partnerships. But because Ketu is in the 1st house, they can always feel a void around the self, around their self-worth, around their perceptions in the world. You'll find that people with Ketu on the ascendant can be very misconstrued or misunderstood in this lifetime, because Ketu is that weird, elusive energy. It's not always something that makes sense in the material world as well, too. All right, so Rahu is the energy of what we're developing, what we're here to learn about and develop. Rahu in the 4th house, learning to develop a healthy relationship with family or homes or real estate, or starting your own family and finding fulfillment from that. That's that Rahu energy. It's what might be uncomfortable. We might want to go towards our career with Ketu in the 10th house, but Rahu in the 4th house is like, wait, you'd actually have a lot of happiness when you're with home and family and developing your own family, things of that nature. So Rahu and Ketu is the direct opposite energy. Rahu is extreme, it's obsessive, it's undeveloped. So that's why it can be sort of extreme, because it's not been well developed in previous lifetimes. Ketu is something we innately understand. It's familiar. It's, really deeply, innately within us, right? So we can have a lot of interesting skills with Ketu. If Ketu is in the 7th house, someone can be really naturally gifted with relationships, with business partnerships. They can just really understand people because that Ketu is so innate, right? But then Rahu's on their ascendant, so they're also here to learn how to develop their own unique personality and to show up in the world in a way that's authentic and learn to take up space with Rahu in the 1st house, right? That's where all of that sort of soul development is occurring. One of my Vedic astrology teachers, who I respect so much and is actually the best Vedic astrologer I've ever met and encountered, and you guys all know him, James Braha. I remember he taught us in one of our classes that wherever Ketu goes, it's kind of like this void, it's like a black hole energy. So Ketu can kind of take things and absorb them and eat them up, essentially, when it goes too close in conjunction with planets or too close in synastry, things like that, because it's taking that energy and eclipsing it, right? So if Ketu is really tight in a conjunction with the moon, someone's mother can be, strange, elusive, distant, on drugs, alcohol, themes like that. But also because Ketu is with the moon and the subconscious, that person can be very spiritual, very intuitive, and they could have developed intuition from past lives as well, too. You'll find a lot of people with Ketu moon are very psychic, very naturally intuitive, because Ketu is what we've already developed, and the moon is the subconscious, the intuition. And they might have some deep connection to women, because the moon is also women as well, too. I've known a lot of people with Ketu moon who just really connect with feminine energy in this lifetime. On the other end of that spectrum, people who are Rahu moon are more erratic with their emotions. They're more all over the place. They haven't really developed their emotional nature yet in this lifetime. The difference of a Rahu moon person and a Ketu moon person is that a Ketu moon person is more detached. They're more even-kiltered. I've been there, done that with developing the emotional nature, so they're less extreme, they're less erratic. Rahu moon people are more prone to extremes than obsessions, because that's that, moon energy, which is the subconscious and the minds that hasn't been fully developed in past lives. All right, or Rahu moon can be the mother is very obsessive, the mother is overbearing, themes like that. If we want to really understand Rahu versus Ketu, Rahu is extreme, it's overt, it's in your face. Rahu is something that you can feel because it's so tangible and it's so present, while Ketu can feel like something that's a void, or it's disconnected, or it's not really there all the time. And we can take this into synastry as well, too, where if we have Rahu synastry with someone, it can feel, like something we're so obsessive about. We really feel so obsessed towards it, but we don't always understand it, and we can actually be scared to go towards it because it's so undeveloped as well, too. While Ketu synastry can feel like something that's very innate, very familiar, but when we go towards it, it can actually be something we kind of get bored of as well too, because Ketu, again, is something we've already done. It's something we've already developed, and we learn the most and we grow the most when we go towards Rahu energy, actually. So I've found in my own life, whenever I've been involved in like Ketu synastry, it feels really good at first, and then time goes on and it starts feeling like something that you're not growing or evolving with as much, because it's like a been there, done that energy. Rahu synastry usually gets better with time. So you'll find with Rahu synastry, it feels like something that's more unfamiliar. It's that kind of synastry where it's not your usual type or not your usual energy, but you can really learn and develop and grow a lot when people fall into your Rahu placement. Similarly to planetary conjunctions or oppositions or trine aspects, where Rahu and Ketu aspect all houses that go 5 and 9 over. If Rahu is with the sun, for example, someone has not developed healthy ego or healthy confidence before. So in this lifetime, it's going to attract a lot of karmic experiences around developing that ego, developing that self-worth, developing that confidence, and developing healthy leadership. Rahu sun people can be very extreme in their ego, where it's like really overt, and one day they're very confident and they come across very confident and they know what they're talking about and they know what they're saying. And then deep down they can actually have a lot of insecurity because they haven't actually really developed that confidence and ego and self-worth. Rahu with the sun can give, really confident or overbearing father energy, or the father or bosses or leadership or things like that can always feel extreme or, overt in some way as well too. Ketu is with the sun, it can create an energy where the father's distant, the father's gone, the father is in film, photography, television, the father's spiritual, right? It's like taking all those meanings of Ketu and bringing it with that planetary energy is how we understand those planets in conjunction with the nodes in Vedic astrology. Okay, so think of Rahu as something that we really desire and we really want and we can really learn so much from, but it's not our natural place to be, right? Ketu is something that might be natural. It has come with us from previous lifetimes. It's something that we can have weird or strange innate gifts with, but it's not always the place that our soul gets the most growth and development in this lifetime. All right. And what I find with Rahu and Ketu is usually the best that we can feel is when we find some sort of balancing between the both, right? So they say that we're kind of more meant to go towards our Rahu or our North Node placement. And while that's true, that is going to be where we develop and grow the most. I also think it's really important to find equilibrium and balance and not, swing too much to either side of the pendulum. So whenever I get clients and I'm reading their like Rahu Ketu axis point, I always give them this sort of like imagery of a pendulum that's swinging too far into one direction and then it's swinging too far in the other direction, and it gets very out of balance and extreme in that way. So if someone has Rahu in the first house, Ketu in the seventh house, they have these extremes between themselves and their relationships where it's either like they're giving everything into their relationship, which is that pendulum swinging too far, or they're giving nothing and they can get very selfish or self-focused. So that's that pendulum going too far onto either side, and what we want is to try to bring that into an equilibrium and bring that into balance to really work with that Rahu Ketu energy, right? So people with like Rahu Ketu in the first seventh house axis, if it's not well aspected or not well developed or not well placed, there's extremes between those houses, right? Second house, eighth house, it's extremes between money and security, right? Like, for example, I've had so many clients with like that Rahu second house, Ketu eighth house axis where they don't always understand how to make their own money, and sometimes they rely too much on outside sources for money so they can like marry someone who supports them financially, or they can really not understand like financial security in a way that's healthy with that pendulum that can swing too far in either direction. So Rahu and Ketu is like extremes in the chart. It's where we have our most extremes. It's where we have our most karma. It's where we have our most sort of karmic unraveling and learning and lessons in this lifetime. So you'll find where Rahu and Ketu sits can cause a lot of, I would say, karmic baggage of the chart, right? It's something that like when an astrologer explains to you your Rahu Ketu placement, it all makes sense for you. You're like, oh, that's why I've always struggled with those parts of my life, right? It's something that you can really struggle with until you learn to develop it properly. And I feel so strongly about understanding your Rahu Ketu because it really changed my life when I understood my Ketu in the 10th house placement versus my Rahu in the 4th house placement, where I always, like when I was younger, I would really dream about, oh my God, I want a big career. I really want a big career, which is, the opposite of Ketu in my 10th house, right? I really found as I was going throughout my life that I got kind of forced into a more spiritual career, and it was actually the only thing that truly brought me fulfillment, was working in healing and working as a Vedic astrologer, because it's Ketu, right? It's like I'm going towards that Moshka energy, that spiritual liberation energy. So it's really important to understand your Rahu Ketu energy in the chart. Rahu or Ketu is best placed in Virgo. So if you have Rahu and Virgo in a house and it's not super afflicted, you can actually have a lot of power wherever Rahu sits on the material world. And then if Ketu is in Virgo and it's well placed and not, badly aspected, you can have a lot of spiritual power with wherever Ketu is sitting. So Rahu is that materialistic, worldly desire, Rahu is obsessions. Rahu is extremes. If someone has Rahu with Venus, they're extremely obsessive about like the arts and creativity and love and passion. One example of someone with a strong Rahu Venus is Lana Del Rey, and all of her music is about passion, intensity, extremes in relationships. That's Rahu with Venus. It's creating this like intense, obsessive energy in it. Someone has Ketu with Venus, they can be detached at times in relationships, or they can want a spiritual relationship because that's bringing Ketu with Venus, right? It's creating some sort of detached, spiritual, Moshka-like energy. Either Rahu or Ketu with Venus can also, create very karmic relationships because Rahu and Ketu is always bringing that karma into the placement of the chart, into the conjunction of planets. It's very karmic by nature. In transit, if we have like Rahu over our natal Venus, we can attract, karmic relationships. If we have Ketu over our Venus, we can attract spiritual karmic relationships. It's always going to be that karmic baggage energy that's coming in with Rahu or Ketu. Okay. And it's really important to know that Rahu is an energy that can get better with time and better with development. Right? While Ketu is something that can be innately familiar and something we just have some sort of strange innate gifts or abilities or talents within. So Ketu Venus people can be very innately creative, very innately artistic, but sometimes because it's Ketu, they don't always get the most fulfilled when they go towards it in this lifetime. Sometimes they have another purpose that they're here to develop. I always remember I had this one client once who had Ketu Venus, and I told him, I was like, you have a really great chart for the arts and all things creative, but it might not actually bring you the most fulfillment in this lifetime because it's Ketu. And he actually had been an artist and a photographer, and he told me, he was like, what's funny is, I did art for a while, but I kind of didn't feel that fulfilled by it. That's Ketu. Someone has Rahu with Venus, they can get a lot of that fulfillment and that material worldly desire and success in the arts or in beauty, in love, in fashion, in romance, all of that sort of energy. All right, so it's not about, going away from our Ketu and never having any fulfillment there, but it's about understanding that when we develop Rahu, that's usually when we grow and evolve the most. And when we find that equilibrium and that balance between the both, there's a lot of power in that. All right, and another thing that's, one of my Vedic astrology teachers taught me as well too, is that when you go towards planets that sit with Rahu, there can just be this like luck or this abundance there. So someone has Rahu Venus and they go towards the arts, they go towards fashion, they go towards beauty, they go towards perfume, they go towards things like that. There can just be a good energy that unravels because the soul is already going in that direction. Rahu Sun going towards leadership, going towards, working for yourself, going towards developing confidence can be an energy that unfolds the best in that direction. Rahu with Mercury, someone goes towards education, teaching, writing. Things can go well there. Rahu with Saturn, when they go towards developing responsibility, duty, structure, order, organization, things can go well in that direction. Okay. And when Ketu's with planets, there can at times be this void energy that sits there. So Ketu Saturn can create people that don't really understand Saturn energy, and it creates this void within Saturn. So Saturn is discipline, responsibility, structure, order. Ketu Saturn, if other things are aspecting it and it's not well aspected, can be this lack of structure, lack of order, lack of the father, lack of responsibility. Themes like that can unravel. Ketu at the moon, lack of, emotional expression, lack of feeling like the mother is always there. Themes like that can unravel. So Ketu is more of that void, that lack, but Ketu is also very spiritual and innately understood. All right, I hope that this brought some clarity and some understanding into the energy of Rahu versus Ketu in Vedic astrology. It's very, very different than the understanding of the North, South Node and Western, in the sense that Rahu is just this very extreme, obsessive, materialistic energy, while Ketu is this void-like, spiritual Moshka energy in the chart. Very different energies. And you can really tell when someone is like Rahu dominant versus Ketu dominant. I mean, at least I can tell. People with Rahu dominant energy, which would mean that they have Rahu with a lot of personal planets, Rahu on the ascendant, Rahu based nakshatras. They're very intense or extreme in their energy in some way. When people are Ketu dominant, Ketu on the ascendant, Ketu with a lot of personal planets, Ketu based nakshatras, they're more like introspective and withdrawn and elusive in their energy. And something to always remember as well too is Rahu is the future, Ketu is the past. So this is something that I've sort of unraveled in my own studies, but when I've known people in my personal life that are very Ketu dominant, they love the past. They love the past. So they will dress like they're from a different era. They can be, always wearing clothes that are from a different era. That's like Ketu on the ascendant. That's Ketu nakshatras. They really have a connection to the past. Someone has Rahu on the ascendant, Rahu-based nakshatras, Rahu, tightly conjuncting personal planets. They have more of that forward-moving, forward-eccentric thinking sort of energy. So they might dress in a way that's like out of the box, new, different in some way. That's more of that Rahu energy. Ketu is like, okay, been there, done that. We've seen this in the past. Rahu is like something that we haven't explored yet. So Rahu is very forward-moving. It's innovative. And Rahu is also technology as well, too. So if someone has strong Rahu or Rahu conjuncting personal planets, they can also do well in fields of technology as well. All right, that was a pretty condensed understanding of Rahu and Ketu, because the truth is we could talk about Rahu and Ketu for 7 hours and still not get the full understanding, because it is such a deeply complex topic in astrology. But, just taking these sort of key pieces and understanding your own Rahu, Ketu energy in your chart is very useful in understanding why things have unraveled in a certain way in your life. All right, and I always like to use that pendulum imagery where it's like Rahu and Ketu is always trying to find that balance and not swing too far to one extreme. Not going way too much towards Rahu, but not going way too much towards Ketu. We want to find that balance in this lifetime. All right, sending all the love. Comment down below if you guys are more Rahu dominant, more Ketu dominant. I am actually more Rahu dominant, which is kind of funny because I have Ketu in my 10th house. So I come across Ketu like in my career. I come across spiritual, I come across introspective, I'm an astrologer, that's literally Ketu in the 10th house. But in my personal life, I'm actually very Rahu. I'm very much about eccentricities, and I used to do a lot of arts, and I've always been just very Rahu, where I was constantly thinking of new ideas and new inventions. And when I was younger, I would stay up all night thinking about weird, creative, inventive ideas, which is very Rahu. And I tend to attract people into my life that are very Rahu dominant, because I'm like, I understand you. I understand all the sort of eccentric, interesting Rahu energy where it's constantly wanting to do things that are innovative or inventive or forward-moving in some regard. And sometimes you'll find if people are very Rahu-based, they don't really care that much about traditions. They don't care that much about the past. They're more focused on how things can progress moving forward. That's more of that Rahu energy. All right. We'll talk soon. Comment, like, and subscribe for more content. And again, I would love to know if you guys are more Rahu dominant, more Ketu dominant, or where Rahu and Ketu is in the axis point of your chart as well too. I'll try to respond and give some insights if I can. All right. Sending you all the love. We'll talk soon.